Hey.
Hello, hello. All
Hey.
right, so let me get my volume up. All right. So, hello everyone. We are so glad to have you joining us today for this inaugural show for Let's Talk North Carolina Genealogy. So we actually have two ways to view the session. We have it going through a YouTube live link on the channel, and we also have a Zoom session. So we're actually going to try to keep up with chats on both sides. That'll be interesting, right,
Wish
ladies?
us luck.
So, but we just want to welcome and thank everyone for your time this afternoon.
Yes. And we want to just start off just telling you a little bit about what this venture is. This is something that I personally have wanted to do for a long time, to do something where we can focus just on North Carolina genealogy research, because North Carolina is a special place that offers us lots of resources, but sometimes gets buried and we don't hear, as much. And we want to make this a very collaborative effort. So however the show goes today, that's probably not the way it's going to be, because we're still trying to fine tune it and figure out ways to bring you, our listeners, and our guests into it a little bit more. But the show is North Carolina focused, and each first and third Saturday of the summer, we will focus on a different topic. And we just want you to feel like this is just as much your program as it is ours. And so we're going to start off just introducing ourselves to you, and then we're going to get right into the content, because the content of the show is only planned for 30 minutes, just so you kind of know what we're doing. And then after the 30 minutes, we will do a short chat, a short question and answer time. So during the program, if you do have questions about North Carolina birth records, please type them into the chat on whichever platform you're using, whether it's Zoom or whether you're on YouTube. And then we'll have our after chat, is what we're calling it. And we're hoping to start that right at 1 o'clock. So Tania, you're
Yes,
on.
so to introduce myself real quickly, my name is Tania Kuntz. I am from Nashville, Tennessee, and my family roots are in North Carolina on both sides, eastern part of the state. So I've had many opportunities and discoveries over the past 15 years to learn more about my family. I am a volunteer with the U.S. GenWeb Project. I volunteer a lot with North Carolina GenWeb, so that's also helped increase my understanding and knowledge base, so I'm glad to be here.
And I am Renata Yarbrough Sanders. I'm thrilled that this is actually something that's coming to fruition. I have been researching my personal genealogy for about 23 years now, and have been in the speaker realm for, about maybe 8 or 9 years now. So some of you may have heard me speak before, or you may have heard me on Black Pro Gen. I just love not only doing my own research, but sharing my knowledge with others and helping others however I can. We'll talk about some of other endeavors a little later in the show, but I'm just so thankful that everyone's here today and ready to get going. And now I'd like to introduce our guest, Diane Acey Richard, and let her tell you a little bit about herself.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be your inaugural guest. I'm a professional researcher. I'm based here in Raleigh, where there's a lot of great resources for North Carolina research. I've been professional about 16 years now, but I've been researching for decades, so my own family. I do research, I write articles, I do speaking like Renata does. I'm also the current editor of the North Carolina Genealogical Society Journal. So I've been doing that for the last 4 years. And that just gets my hands into a lot of neat records because I just have fun playing for, I like to go down rabbit holes. I spend a lot of time in rabbit holes. And I know we can all identify it. In fact, it's hard to keep focused sometimes.
Absolutely.
And then the other thing is I'm the co-leader for Tar Heel Discoveries, which we would have had the third offering this April, except COVID-19 came into play. And so we're hoping back in April 2021 to have it. It's a 1-week program at the North Carolina Archives that is hands-on research, one-on-one support. And then we have 2 lectures a day from specialists about North Carolina records.
Thank
Great.
you. All
Great.
right, so we're going to get right into our topic for today with Tania starting us off talking a little bit about those birth records.
Yeah, so I'm going to share my screen so hopefully everyone can see it. So we just want to do a quick overview, right, of what we know about birth records in the state. Many of you may know that North Carolina as a state started requiring the registration of births in 1913. That was the date in which it became a statewide mandate. There were some exceptions who were cities that were doing it prior to that. Diane, I believe you what cities were available before that? Why don't you pitch in here?
Okay, the cities before that were Raleigh and Wilmington.
All right, so 1913, it became statewide mandate, although not everyone was doing it consistently then, right? So it took some time before it became a standard practice. Well, what did we get in 1913? Well, to highlight that, I wanted to quickly share, this is my grandmother's birth certificate that she wrote away for in 1952. Now, she was born in 1924, and you can see it's very basic information. It has her name, her parents, and it refers to her certificate. It's district numbers given, certificate numbers given, the filing date, the volume, and the page. So when I actually ordered that from the register, the local register of deeds, this is the full birth certificate. So it has details just as we saw in her version that she received, her parents' names, some additional details, but this has even more information. It tells us where her parents were born, tells us what child she was, how many children her parents had before her. So this is kind of the standard form that we got around this time. Now, it wasn't standard across every county, but at least there was this mandate to do them. So then let's see. So we also wanted to touch on where are some quick places you can go online if you're looking for birth certificates or birth records. So there's 3 places in particular we just wanted to highlight. The first is Ancestry. They do have a database called North Carolina Birth Indexes 1800 to 2000. Now, the reason the date goes back to 1800 is because of some delayed records that they do have included. And what we wanted to do is just scroll down to the About, because this gives you a feel for what is in the database. And here they explain that what types of information is available per field. And then they also, if we scroll further down, show you the coverage. So what we see by looking at the coverage is not every county has the same time range available. So that's something to keep in mind when you're researching with Ancestry's database. And there are counties missing. For example, Wake is not in their database. So it's important, right, to just be aware of what is in here and what is not.
It's hard to search. It's hard to search for somebody who's not there.
Exactly. So, and this is just an index. This doesn't get you the full birth record. It's just an index. Now, if we go over to FamilySearch.org, they also have a copy of this same database from Ancestry, North Carolina Birth Index 1800 to 2000. So it gives you another free option for researching those records. They do not give you as much description about what is in the database. So that's why I wanted to show the Ancestry site first, because they give you more details. Now, another location to use in Family Search is a database they have called North Carolina Births and Christenings. This spans 1866 to 1964, and this also is just an index, so you won't find full records. They do include some delayed records here as well, and Renata will talk more about delayed records. And we wanted to point out to you the coverage in this database. And when we look county by county at this first column, births and christenings, we see a lot of zeros here, don't we? So again, it's important to just be aware of what is in the database that you're searching. But it's an option, right? If you're not finding something in the other one, you could try here. So we just wanted to point that out.
Because you want to make sure that that search is as exhaustive as you can make it.
Very good point.
Mm-hmm.
And then the third resource we wanted to point out is on Family Search as well. This is the North Carolina Center for Health Statistics Vital Records Unit, County Birth Records. Now, the time span on this database is 1913 to 1922. And guess what? These are full certificates. Mm-hmm. So Family Search has actually been adding to this pretty regularly over the past couple of months. I've noticed that in their updates. I'm sure you ladies have both noticed that as well. Mm-hmm. So currently there's thousands of actual birth certificates, full images in this database that you can search and find, and Wake is actually being covered. So that's a good highlight.
Finally, you know,
right? So we're very happy to see that. And if you look, this is an example of one of my grandmother's brothers, his birth certificate that I had to write away for 15 years ago is now actually online in this database. So it's very convenient and someplace to search if your time range is 1913 1922. Now,
Tania,
yes.
can you talk just a little bit about what some of the elements of the birth certificate are, some of the genealogical information that can be found there?
Absolutely. So we have the location, right? So what county, Edgecombe County, the township, and the town. We have details about how you would find this later. So the page number and the certificate number, name of the child. In this case, they misspelled his name. His name was not Lorena, it was Lorenza. And they actually have him as a girl. He was a boy.
Wow.
Oh,
It happens.
It happens.
it does.
Birth order. He was my great grandparents' first child. And it tells that parents were married and it gives his date of birth. Has the parents' name, so Abraham and Martha, their residence, they were living on Stallings Farm, their race, in this case, they were using colored at the time, and their ages, 26 and 20. The birthplaces, so this is a data point that tells us they were born in Washington County, and their occupation, and whether or not they could read and write. So both of my great-grandparents could read and write. Number of children born to this mother, including present birth, 1, because he was their first child. It's different from my grandmother. They'd had 2 more before her that did not live to adulthood. And so you see that on there.
That is
because it
such
says number of
great
children
information.
now living.
Sorry.
So yeah, exactly. You're right. And that's what's information I learned when I started my genealogy quest. I did not know that until I saw her birth certificate.
Yep.
So, and then details about the actual birth, what time he was born, 5:30 a.m. And he was delivered by a midwife, and it gives the address of the midwife. So very rich information that you can get.
Yes, very valuable. Thank you for that.
Yeah. So if you're using an index and you need to then follow up and get the birth certificate, I have a personal favorite of where I like to go. I like to go to the directly to the Register of Deeds office because one great thing for the county.
Okay.
Yeah. Because one great thing about North Carolina is uncertified copies of birth certificates are publicly available. You just write away for them. You can often get them at low cost. So yeah, so that's really just what we wanted to cover at this point. I think we actually may have had a chat question, but we can do that question and answer. So I'll turn it over to you, Renata.
Okay.
Let me stop sharing my screen so you can.
Because it won't let me.
So you can do yours. All right.
All right, we're rolling. Okay, so I don't know why mine doesn't want to just open right up nice and big. Doesn't want to do that for me today. Okay, so I am just going to talk for a minute about the I guess the most widespread finding online that is available for North Carolina, and these are the birth indexes. And what the indexes do, just like the index in the back of the book, of any book, they're letting you know what birth records are available on a fuller scale, the ones that Tania just showed you at the county level, as well as at the state archives on microfilm. So this index is available on Family Search and Ancestry, and we are focused on online research right now, especially since everything is closed. But the original books are found at the county level. I think when the 3 of us started with this, we were all lugging big, heavy books and turning pages to find this information. So you can usually find them at the Register of Deeds office in the county or occasionally at the courthouse. On these indexes, you will find the child's full name, their gender, well, if they have a name. Not everybody has a name. We'll talk about that in a minute. The gender, their race or color, the day they were born, the date they were born, and where they were born specifically within that county. Those are the things that should be on there. And then depending on which county in North Carolina it is, you may see both parents' names, the mother's name, or the father's name. It was done differently in different counties. So here on this example, I have the arrow pointing to my aunt, and I know it's probably a little small for you to see, but I want to just show you the elements here. The first column is for race, and there's a C there for colored. As Tania said, we were colored. So, okay, so we've been colored, we've been Negro, we've been Black, we've been African-American. So it just depends on what time period you're looking at the document, what you're going to be called. whites have usually just been white, because to use a C for Caucasian would be too confusing with colored. So you usually just see a W for white. So you can see that in this column, most of the Yarboroughs that were born were colored. There's a white down there. And then the date of birth, which was 4/17/1920. And then it says Yarborough girl, because they didn't have the name. Now, I don't know if my Aunt Sue was named yet and the person who recorded it just didn't know, or if they hadn't named her yet, but she's Yarborough girl. Here in this county, it looks like mostly the father's names were recorded. What I've wondered before, but I haven't researched it, is if where I do see a mother's name, was that a single mother? Because in most cases in Franklin County, it's the father's name. So that's my grandfather, Calvin Yarborough. And then of course, they're all in the same county, but the counties are divided into townships. So you get this localized information so that you can know where in the county your ancestor lived. They lived in Lewisburg. And then here's the gold mine right here, because this is what makes it an index. It is the index to those great big heavy books that I was talking about. So it's telling you that if you want to see the full birth record, you're going to go to book, I think that's a 7, I believe it's a 7, book 7, page 22. So you just go right to the Register of Deeds office and you pull book 7, you open it to page 22, and you will see this record. And it's also the way that you would know how to order it if you are not in driving distance to wherever you need this from. You would order it this way from the county. So this is the birth index. And then the other thing that I want to just briefly talk about, and I think Diane, that wasn't supposed to happen. I believe Diane is also going to be discussing this a little bit, delayed birth certificates in North Carolina. If you're not sure about this, what delayed birth certificates were, or are, they still are, is they are birth certificates that are registered 1 or more years after the date that someone was born. So for some reason, you didn't have a birth certificate, you can't find your birth certificate, you've never seen your birth certificate, it's never been recorded, and you are going in the Army, you've got to have a birth certificate. You're going to have to come up with one, and this is how you do it. You apply to the county where you were born or where the person was born, and you apply to the Register of Deeds office. And then you have to provide documentation that the person actually exists and that they have a name. So you have to prove their name, when and where they were born. You have to have the full name of their mother, preferably the maiden name of their mother. And then, except in just a few cases, according to the mandate, you also need to be able to give the full name of the father. And to present this, you have to have 3 pieces of evidence that give that information. One can be an affidavit, which I was hoping to be able to share with you today, because I actually have the affidavit that was written for my grandmother when she had to write in to get her delayed birth certificate, but I wasn't able to find out which box I have it packed away in, so I didn't come up with it. But all 3 of the documents have to prove the name and the date of birth. And then 2 of them have to prove where the person was born. And then again, 1 has to prove the parentage. So this is what a delayed birth certificate is about. You submit that information to the Register of Deeds, and if it's approved, then you can get a birth certificate for yourself or the person that you're applying for. That's my little part.
Great.
And now I'd like to introduce our special guest, again, Diane Acey Richard, who is now going to do a bit of a presentation for you on birth records.
Well, thank you so much. Yes, I have to admit, it's hard for me to do things without some visuals. So I'm going to put on my magic timer so I don't talk too long. Anybody who knows me knows that can be an issue. And let me do a start share screen here. And If you're not seeing it, let me know, but I can start talking anyway. One thing I want to reiterate that has been said a couple of times is, remember in Carolina, it's kind of 100 counties, 100 fiefdoms. And that means that records are not the same across all the counties. They don't collect the same information on the exact same form. They meet, but that's unique. And then actually, as time goes, different court clerks will use different forms. So even in one county, the records change time. And that's really important about some of the stuff I will be talking about. First, I want to revisit those municipal records or city registers. As you know, 1913 is the magic date, but Raleigh and Wilmington both started in 1890 for Raleigh, 1904 for Wilmington. So Raleigh is the only one that's pre-1900. And what you see in the top left here is an example of a full page. And then I just tried to make a slightly bigger version at the bottom here. And what I want to point out is that these are organized by year, and then they're fairly chronological by month and day. You have the name of the father and the name of the mother. So the same information that you've been seeing on the certificates that started in 1913. And a really big difference, or what really struck me about these records, is look at this, almost none of the children have their name. And as Renata said, we don't know if the child wasn't named at that point or if that information wasn't provided, but actually it wasn't unusual to wait to name children. And to be honest, some of it is because many children died fairly young or quickly. So it was a complex issue at the time. I think people wanted to sometimes wait a day or two before bestowing a name. Yeah. So this means when you're looking at these 1890 up to 1913 records, you may have to focus on the parents' names and the date and then correlate it with another record. So you may know somebody in your family was born to these parents and then find it here, or as Renata mentioned, with delayed birth certificates. And delayed birth certificates were really driven by the Social Security starting in 1936. So as Social Security started in 1936 and people had to file their SS5 forms, which I'll put it briefly at the end, I'll mention of that. They didn't have birth certificates and they needed a birth certificate. So they would go back to the county to file their birth certificates. And I would almost bet that this Beulah Lee McCrary, she probably wanted to file for a Social Security number, went back to the county and then probably corrected her birth certificate at that time also. So it's an interesting thing because she needed a birth certificate with her name on it. So kind of keep in mind that even these registers could go back and be corrected or edited at a certain point. But again, only 2 cities, but if your ancestors lived in these 2 cities, then definitely want to check it out. Next thing I want to talk about briefly is, sorry, I'm looking down. I hate it when your phone goes dark, don't you? I should have put a 10-minute timer on it. You know how it goes. It's the tech world that works for you and against you. I know.
Take your time, Diane.
We could all identify. Yes. Bastardy bonds. And what I've put up here for you, and I know I've covered part of it, but because I can only fit so much on the screen, but I put some notes, and I know this is taped, so you can always come back and go through the details. Bastardy bonds, a lot were created in North Carolina. And the bottom line is these were typically created just before or just after a child was born, and I'll say out of wedlock. So if they determined that the mother was not perceived to be married at that time or in a union, however they want to define that, the court did not want to ultimately be responsible for maintaining that child. I mean, that's the ultimate reason these exist. Is the court system did not want to have to manage these children. So the court wanted somebody to be responsible. And what would happen is, in this case, we have Martha, and you can see the writing basically says the maintenance of a certain bastard child begotten on the body of Martha Duell. And what's interesting about this one is Martha did do it, and she has these co-signers, James G. Jordan and James Brantley. Ultimately, Martha and James actually did marry. So this was just an interesting story where sometimes that happens too. A child is born, out of wedlock, but it doesn't mean the parents won't subsequently marry. So be careful in interpreting this when you're looking at records, and don't just assume that this child has the dual surname or that the parents didn't marry. Now, if a husband's not identified, which happened in this case, sometimes a father or brothers will be co-bondsmen. So look for those family relationships to be mentioned. And again, you're often not getting an exact date. We like to get exact birth dates, but let's be realistic. But these are also documenting so many births that occurred before 1913. So you are definitely looking at 19th century records. Another record I want to talk about real quickly is adoption records. And I know a comment came up in the stream that I responded to, that adoption records are typically sealed nowadays, but those are modern adoption records. If you get to some of these older adoption records, they are public records. And I put a note at the bottom here because I wanted to let you, and I verified this yesterday. They do exist for many North Carolina counties, and it's often in the miscellaneous collection. So it's not like there's a separate collection, like bastardy records have a separate collection. Adoption records don't, for the most part. But if you go into miscellaneous, and I just put a little tag here so you can come back and look at this later. If you do adoption for the site of the archives, it will bring up for every county that mentions adoption records in their holdings.
Okay.
So you can access them.
Nice.
And then here's just an example.
Yeah, I didn't either.
This is why we have Diane, I don't want to let you.
Hey, I had to do my homework yesterday because I did not want to misspeak, you know. And as you can see in this one example, there's a very specific birth date that's listed, and parents and other information. So keep in mind that older adoption records, and like, for example, Wake County, it's up to 1933. So it comes into the 20th century, and that's true for many North Carolina counties. So check that out.
That's great.
Another kind of different record, as you can tell, they gave me the different records, right? So apprentice records. We talked about bastardy records. If a bastardy bond occurs, in many cases, that's the end of the story about that child until they become an adult. Now, if a bastardy bond doesn't occur, so the mother can't handle it, the father can't handle it, they can't identify, or her father can't support the child, whatever the circumstances are, children would be apprenticed. And many children were apprenticed, and they were apprenticed very young. And this one here is 12 years on the 31st of December, 1861. I have seen children apprenticed as infants, and it did happen. The thing to keep in mind too is that before the Civil War, especially in the 1830s, 40s, and 50s, what we find is that many free persons of color were apprenticed. So keep that in mind, that the apprenticeships occurred. They were, regardless of your color, obviously those enslaved before the Civil War were enslaved. And free persons of color and quote white children were apprenticed, and you might get exact birth dates. Now I'm running out of time, so I'm zipping along here. Funeral home records for Mitchells. I know. As we talked about, see that there's so much we could talk forever.
Oh yeah, right? We could talk a long time.
We could talk a long time. Funeral home records. Even though this record is for 19.
Can I break in again? It's me, but you know, this is the whole thing. We want to have a conversation. I may have missed it because I was checking the chats. Did you mention about how sometimes it turns out that the apprentice records are actually showing us what turns out to be the father of the apprenticed child?
No, I hadn't, because I was focusing on, you know, the birth part, and you're right, thinking about
that's just a little aside to let researchers know. It's not all the time. It's probably not even most of the time, but it is often that you can, if you really research the person who is the apprenticer, you may find a familiar relationship, if not the father-child relationship. So that's just a little note. Okay, Diane. Thanks.
Yeah, no, and that's interesting because people assume that apprenticeships, something so formal, was with strangers. And sometimes it wasn't, but yet it was formalized under the court. So, but that's actually good for the child. That's their benefit. Yes. So last thing I'm going to pop up for, and then I'm going to put up a quick list, is funeral home records. though these individuals for this Wake County, actually Raleigh Funeral Home Mitchells, died in the 1920s, as has been said, there's not good coverage for birth records up until World War II almost. That's really the time they'll say, yes, everybody should have a birth record no matter what. So this funeral home record is giving us the birthplace as well, birthplace, should put the arrow in the right place, and then the birth date and the parents. Now, this won't always end up in a tombstone. It won't always end up in an obituary, because you might not have obituaries or tombstones that are ever created, but the funeral home might have collected that information. So again, keep that in mind as an alternative. And then this is my big list, and I'm not going to run through, because that's something you'll have to rewatch this for to check out this list. But what I have tried to do is list a few things that are exact birth date information, and then that are more birth year. And everything that's kind of in green, except newspaper notices, because I ran out of time, so I didn't mention that, or something we already talked about in the program. So assume I talked about those newspaper notices. And then I've listed a few other things. So this is not comprehensive, but I did want to point out one thing. In 1902, North Carolina voter registration. It is a record group that's unique to North Carolina. There are some other states that had similar things, but they did not have this. And it's 1902 to 1908. It will list the individual, their age, which then we can work a birth year from, and it will typically list how they got their voter rights, which can be a father or grandfather. So, okay, I might have come in a few seconds long, but hopefully not too bad.
Oh no, that's perfectly good. Yeah. Great. What a great list of resources too, right? To really get you thinking out the box of where you can go for this type of information. So
Absolutely.
yeah, this is
Diane,
good.
thank you so much. You're as wonderful as Tania, and I knew you would be. And I think I just kind of want to apologize a little bit to our guests, because we are trying so hard to stay on a strict timeline, but I can hear that we're all like speed talking. And so we might have to stretch that timeline out a little bit. We really want to give you information that's going to help you in your research. And there's just so much. North Carolina is very rich in resources for genealogical research. So we will fine tune this as we go along, and we'll probably end up having to stretch it out, because I wanted it to be 30 minutes, but I don't think that's going to happen.
Some listeners will tell you I often sound like a gerbil anyway, so it's probably no different.
All right. So Diane, if you could take your screen down so that I can share, please.
Definitely.
Ladies and gentlemen who have joined us, this is actually where the formal part of our show ends, as far as this is where we're finished giving content, but we are going to go right into our after chat after we talk about this slide right here. And I'm sorry that I will have to work on my skills, because I would like for it to open up in full screen, and that's not what I'm having happen. But next on Let's Talk North Carolina Genealogy, we're going to be talking about marriage records. And what we've planned for these first 3 shows is to just kind of go chronologically through what happens in life. You're born, and then you get married, and then you unfortunately have to say bye-bye. And so those are our first 3 shows: birth, then marriage, then death records. And then we have some fuller content coming for you after that. So our next show after this will be in 2 weeks on June 20th at 12:30 Eastern time. And I've written down, because we don't put it in the post, that's 11:30 Central, 10:30 Mountain, and 9:30 Pacific time. So if you are with us from the West Coast, good morning, and thank you for waking up with us today. You can contact us as a group. Well, it's not really a group, because it's just Tania and myself, at ncsummerseries2020@gmail.com, or you can contact us individually in the ways that you see in the 2 boxes at the bottom of the screen. Tania, do you want to add anything as we're closing?
No, I mean, it's been great to see some of the feedback from individuals in the chat already. So we're hoping to just provide you with useful information to help keep you moving in your genealogy. So we're glad to be able to do this, and glad to have you here with us. So
Well, we just want to thank everyone who joined us for the premiere, our inaugural show. We had, I don't know what the final number was, Tania. I know a couple of nights ago, there were 120, about 120
Registrations.
people registered. And
Yeah.
that was why we had to move it off of just Zoom and put it on YouTube, because we didn't want anyone to come knocking and get that awful message that the webinar is full.
Yeah.
So, all the people registering can thank yourselves for making us have to step it up a little bit and
Yes.
figure out how to do it on YouTube Live. So from now on, there will be no registrations. This will always be on YouTube Live. You can come back and view this anytime, spend a little time, a little more time on the slides, just pause your video and get what you need from it. And so
Yes.
I know some people may leave now, but if you'd like to stick around for the after chat, this is where we're going to address the questions that have been asked at this time.
And if I could pitch in, if you subscribe to our YouTube channel, you'll be notified when we do go live. So it kind of serves to remind you that we're coming online.
Yeah, just hit that subscribe button before you leave today. So, and those of you that are on Zoom, Tania, the link went out in the last Zoom invite, right? Or reminder, right? The
link
for the YouTube?
Yes.
Okay,
It's in the event posting on Facebook. Yeah.
So if you're on Zoom today, please click on that link and click subscribe. All right, so here we go. Diane, you had already answered a question in the chat. So can we start off with you just reading that and discussing the answer that you gave? And remember, we're trying to do this in 15 minutes.
Okay, I provided a couple of them, so I have to remember what I was doing. Okay, so one question that came up was that somebody mentioned about an amended birth certificate that they had. And the thing to recognize in North Carolina is that counties have a tendency to have the final version of a birth certificate. They don't have necessarily the changes that have occurred, even though it was created in the county. But the Department of Health and Human Services, they're the ones that have the history, shall we say, of a birth certificate. And in some cases, if you know there was an amendment made to a birth certificate, you can go to the Department of Health and Human Services. It will cost you more, it will take longer, but sometimes that's the only choice you have. Check with the county first, but just recognize you might want to get it. Now, adoption has come up several times, and I've tried to respond to that a few times on the same subject. Unfortunately, adoption records are closed in North Carolina. So even if a birth certificate is amended to indicate who the adoptees, who the adoptive parents are versus the original, you cannot get that original parent information. North Carolina is a very close state about adoption records at this time. And you will only find as the official birth certificate, the one of the adoptive parents. And that's the way it is. Other states are loosening their rules. So adoptees are able to access those original birth certificates of the birth parents. But North Carolina, that's not a possibility at this time.
Okay, I have a question in the Zoom chat from Trish Blunt. And it says, for Wayne County on the index, they mostly just have the father's name. Does the certificate have both parents? TIA.
Thanks in advance.
Thanks in advance.
Oh, okay. I see. All right, Diane, you knew that. Okay.
I know. I only know a few of them. My kids are,
I'm telling on myself. So I think Trish, we probably answered that during my part, and maybe you had already typed the question. It will depend on the county. So as you saw for Franklin County, they seemed to be focused on the father's name where there was a father. But the answer is yes. If both parents are known on the actual certificate, you will see both names. Okay, Tania, you have one?
No, we have no questions on the YouTube side.
Oh, okay.
So,
and I think the next one from Samuel, how do I get an original birth certificate once I discover the one I have is an amended birth
And that's
certificate.
that's the one
He-
I was
He was
responding
the
to. Yes.
adoptee.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, he's an
Mhm.
adoptee. Now, another one that came up was, okay, let me see. It was about funeral
Funeral
homes. Who
homes.
asked that? I guess
Mhm.
Susan
Susan
asked that.
Borden. Mhm.
And yes, my
Evans.
experience, in fact, are that funeral homes are sold, and that's great because they have a tendency as a business to keep living. My experience is a lot of times whoever buys out the funeral home keeps those older records. Now, I can't say every single time, but I do check out the history of a funeral home. And if I know that the one my family used, it's been bought, I do check with the current owners. And I'll actually say more than 50% of the time they have had those older records. And we're talking sometimes older records that are 100 years ago. And they've been able to pull up that information for me.
I have had the
Nice.
worst luck with funeral homes in my personal research. They have burned down.
Oh,
The records have been thrown away.
yeah.
That's the
Oh,
one in Norfolk that really gets me. They've been thrown away. So again, it is a place by place
Yes.
situation. But
yeah.
always something to check up on.
And to
And when I have called, sometimes they are like, I mean, I'm not even going way back. I'm like 1938.
Mhm.
Why would we have records from 1938? Those were thrown away a long time ago. I'm like, oh.
I mean, I'll find the same thing for 1980s and 1990s because
Yeah.
you're just trying to connect like who was linked to the person because there wasn't an obituary or there's no tombstone.
Mhm.
And they kind of look at you like, but then you have the other ones who there's a full archive and they have a book with the ledger that has an index in it that they can access.
Right.
You know, and like you said, but it never, I guess the key thing is always look. The worst case is you're going to get an answer that they don't have it. And my like Renata's, my one frustrating time was I literally contacted them saying 1989. And in 1988 is when they cleared all the files out.
Oh
It
no.
was like, oh gosh. I mean, really, that was I would have rather heard that the files were gone 50 years ago, right?
Right.
But to have been so close and just not have thought about it and gotten to it yet, it was like, that just burned, but I had to get over
Yeah.
it.
Right. And I forgot, I'm sorry, because this probably should have been up the whole time we were doing this thing that we're doing right now. But I wanted to, okay, now I can't go back on mine. Tania, there's a comment in the chat about someone who has Kuntz relatives, and we're actually on time to end the show, but I was just going to read a couple of the comments from the chat on YouTube, since there aren't questions, but there are comments.
I'm not seeing any comments on YouTube. Are you seeing comments on the YouTube side?
Oh yeah, there have been tons of comments.
Oh,
All right,
okay.
let
It's
me
not showing for me.
unshare.
Please do read.
Let me
Yeah.
unshare so that I can go back because I want to acknowledge those. We've had quite a few comments. So the one that I wanted to read for you, Tania, is from Mary Wright, and she says,
Okay.
I've never been to North Carolina, but have many DNA matches from North Carolina. My grandfather's brother, Robert Lee, married Pearl Kuntz. Her father's name was Clopton Kuntz.
I know this
lived
family.
in Florida.
Yep.
Yeah.
I know this family. I'll have to connect with you afterwards, Mary. I know this family. I've done research on them.
You might have a cousin there. And that's why I was trying to put the screen back up, because I realized that the email address was not up there. So that was what I was trying to do. We'll give it again in a minute. Just to acknowledge a few more. We've had many compliments. We have people here from New Jersey, Massachusetts, Minnesota, Dallas, Texas, Halifax, North Carolina. That's in my stomping grounds for research, Richmond, Virginia. I had someone comment that they have their people are out of Lewisburg. So Jana J, I'm looking forward to hearing from you at the address provided. We have African-American experience here. Sons and daughters friend Janice Gilliard is here. Oggs, New Jersey, Janice Gilliard. Just so many friends, and then so many new names. And my cousin Ari Wilkins, who is going to be a guest on our 4th episode, and you will not want to miss that. If you don't come to any other episode, you got to come to that 4th one. Ari is fabulous. She's out of Dallas, Texas. I can't read every name. I do see my cousin Willa Jo Green is here. My daughter Natalia Sanders is here. And I don't know if my other daughter, Natasha, I don't see her name, but I know she's going to listen later if she's not here. So I'm just very thankful.
Right.
The comments are wonderful. People are saying it's very helpful. They're looking forward to the next episode. Chris Green is here. Okay, I have to stop, but
Yeah.
thank you. Thank you so much. And, you know, again, we are thankful to you because you made us step it up. You made us come to YouTube. And now, you know, you can re-access these at any time, which we were going to post the videos on YouTube, but it's nothing like being on YouTube live. So
Right.
Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you, everyone.
And
Thanks for
Antoinette
having me.
Ziegler. Yes, they're here.
Yes.
Want to thank our guest again, Diane Acey Richard. She's fabulous, and she will probably join us again in August for another one of our episodes. And maybe next time we come on, we can give you a look at all the future episodes that are coming up. But we, again, can at least tell you that the next one is marriage, and the one after that is death. And the next one is Ari, and I'm not going to tell you her topic yet. We'll hold on to that, but you're going to absolutely love it. I want to add one thing real quick that I forgot to mention, two things that I forgot to mention in my part, and that was midwifery and plantation records as relate to people who had been enslaved. I should have mentioned to you that those are other sources of information on birth records. Midwives usually kept a record book of who they were assisting the birth of, and then they're the ones, as you saw in Tania's record, they are turning that information over to the county. So if you're lucky enough to find a record book from midwives, that's a blessing. And then as far as our enslaved ancestors in North Carolina, as it's been told, formal birth records weren't kept until 1913 in most places. Slavery ended in 1865. So as you know, you have to research the slave owners, but in those slave owners' records, you will often find mentions of births either in the plantation ledgers, in diaries, in family Bibles. So those are just a few places that you can look for birth records on your enslaved ancestors. So sorry, I forgot to put that in earlier. Tania, closing words?
No, this has been fun. I really have enjoyed it, and it's great to see the comments that have come in. And I think we're looking at as much forward to future sessions as it sounds like everyone else is, because as we've said, this is learning for us too. So we really appreciate everyone being here and working with us.
Thank you, everyone, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.
Yep. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.